what a brilliant approach by Big Ag, because you're caught between the rock and the hard place.
Yeah.
And yet, if we don't manage the manure, the water is going to continue to get worse.
Very disheartening to think about.
If you only knew.
This is the Aptitude Outdoors podcast, where we interview travelers, explorers, and outdoorsmen and women to bring you the best tips and stories from around the world.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Aptitude Outdoors podcast. Thanks for tuning back in. Today we have a very special guest, Mrs. Sandy Bihn, the Lake Erie Waterkeeper. Thank you for coming in today. I'm very excited. I love Lake Erie. I love the Maumee River, and you are an expert on both of those things. So before we talk about the history of, the lake and the ongoing issues, why do you love Lake Erie so much that you would take on battling for this lake internationally between U.S. and Canada? Why do you love the lake so much?
Well, when I was a kid, we rented a cottage at Allen's Cove for 2 weeks in Michigan every year. And that was the highlight of my summer. And then when I dated my husband, now of over 50 years, we went to the beach, and we ended up in 1987 building a home on the water next to Maumee Bay State Park. I have loved water. We lived in Delaware when he was in the Air Force. We went to the beach all the time. The beach has always been a draw for me. It's a place that is open and inspiring and changes all the time, and water is life. And water is so important, and I don't think we realize, sometimes how we're allowing it to deteriorate. When, especially here in the Great Lakes, we have one of the greatest assets anyone could have in the whole wide world.
I've been told that many times. Coming from the Toledo area, a lot of people from here always try and get out of here, and then they get out of here and they end up coming back. And with all there's so many water issues out west and stuff, we're so, grateful to have these amazing bodies of water right here. We're drinking it every single day. We're showering it. And it's always been a weird thing, because with having that much access to water, everyone takes it for granted. And I think what really brought this to people's attention, and it already has kind of fizzled out, and we get a little spike every year, is these algal blooms that happen on the Maumee and Lake Erie. And, so let's just go down that rabbit hole. What is causing the algal blooms for people that don't know already? I mean, I know, but what's the issues?
Well, the 2014 water crisis in Toledo is what you're talking about. And so that, everybody remembers that. And the algae, gathered at the intake, at the Toledo intake, and resulted in what it did. So the question is, why, we built our house in 1987. Until the late 90s, we swam in the bay, and we had a great time. In the late 1990s, the algae started to come. It clogged the water, the intakes of our wave runners. We had a float out there. We quit that and put a pool in, because we didn't feel the water was safe anymore. And no one really knew, but it was from the mid-90s till now, through now, unfortunately, not until, because it's not over, the algae just kept getting worse and worse and worse. So yes, climate change is a factor, but it is a factor that has been marching forward for many years now, sadly, and needs to be addressed. But there was another major change in that time that, no one really cites or notices, and that is that the way we raise our meat and dairy, we switched from pasturing and small farmers raising them, where the manure was kind of spread throughout the region, to confining them and then spreading the manure closer to the barns. And, that is a huge contributor, and no one quite knows exactly how much, because the science and the researchers don't focus on manure at all, sadly. So two groups, Environmental Working Group and Environmental Law and Policy Center, did a study in 2019 of the Maumee watershed and found that there were major increases, 40% increases in the number of KFOs, and that's only from 2005. It doesn't even go back to the 90s, because there wasn't any imagery there to do the studies. Those studies have now been pretty much confirmed, but the government doesn't tell us the numbers that are growing. And in fact, right now, as I sit here, so frustrating is there's 10,000 or more permits for swine in the hopper ready to come in, and 6,000 more dairy cows and 100,000 more chickens. And then all that manure is added to the system. So we're paying to take it out while we're putting more in than can be managed. So the big change, but the other sources are wastewater plants, certainly the discharges, and they were pretty much addressed before, along with taking phosphorus out of laundry detergent, which was a big thing. And then, people always ask, well, my lawn fertilizer. Yeah, a little, less than 1%. Scott's took phosphorus out of laundry detergent, which was good. Sadly, lately, the Andersons. I've gone to places where they have phosphorus in their lawn fertilizer, and there's no reason for that. Because generally, once your lawn is mature, you don't need more phosphorus. But it's a very small contributor. In fairness, it's very tiny. So the big ones are what manure and commercial fertilizer are about 90% of what's coming in. And, of that which is growing, manure, which is declining, commercial fertilizer, why? You have to buy one. Commercial fertilizer you have to buy. So when you have to buy it, there's an economic driver. You want to only use what you have to.
Yeah, and so I've seen documentaries about the KFOs and things such as that, and is there still an issue with spreading manure on the ground when it's frozen? Because essentially that is something that is kind of unregulated. I mean, farmers can do that if they like. It's not really like nobody's going to say anything, and that's a huge issue with if it's frozen, it's not getting into the ground. It's really not getting into the ground anyways in the summertime. Like I've seen interviews where you've said on the news and things like that the ground is basically oversaturated and it's not absorbing any of this anymore. It's just getting spread in the hopes that it's doing something, and they need to get rid of it. So, well,
a couple complicating factors is we are the most, we are the old black swamp. So we are the most ditched area in the United States. Drain those ditches, right? So how do we drain them and make it more productive for farming? We put in field tiles. And, there's old field tiles and there's new field tiles because we've been draining this thing forever. And so it has gotten much worse or much more recently so that they drain the fields so they don't flood, so they maximize their yields for their corns and bean, which is the dominant crops here. But, it's the field tiles and whatever, but I want to underscore that the commercial fertilizer phosphorus use, which is a main driver of the harmful algae, is, that is going down by as much as 40% according to the Farm Bureau. They don't like to say that much anymore because then I say, well, yeah, you're reducing that, but at the same time, you're increasing the manure. So the farmers have an economic incentive. They get help. So what they call best management practices work well. That's a good program. But on the manure side, they're allowed to put more than they need. It's widely now, it's more and more acknowledged nationwide. And this isn't just a problem here in the Lake Erie watershed. It's in the Gulf of Mexico, it's in Chesapeake, it's out west, it's everywhere. The romaine lettuce issue happened in California because of runoff from KFOs. So confined animal feeding operations. So if you confine the animals and you put the manure too close to the barns, there's a problem for the water and the air, and it's bad, period. And we need to manage that better, address it. In China, of all places, they are required to treat their manure for E. coli. We have no treatment requirement here. And they limit the number of animals in a watershed. The U.S. Department of Agriculture says that, hey, you have to, if you have an impaired watershed like we do here in the Maumee, you shouldn't be adding these. You should be treating this manure very carefully. We're not. So we're just ignoring those recommendations and those policies, to support big ag.
Hey everybody, thanks for checking out this episode. If you feel like you're getting something out of it, go down in the link below and buy me a coffee. The Aptitude Outdoors podcast is fully self-funded by me. So if you're digging it, I'm just throwing out a tip jar and I appreciate you listening. Let's dive right back into this episode.
People get super up in arms about this debate also because it's no secret that, the society as we know it would collapse without farming. There would be no sustainable way for us to live as the society we are in nowadays. So I understandably the farmers get upset with this issue because they feel attacked. They feel like attacked.
Some do, some don't. The head of our organization is a farmer.
Yeah.
And he's on the Ohio Farm Bureau, and he's here with the local Farm Bureau. He's a row cropper. There is a difference, as we need to say, well, and the other thing is the farmers that are raising the crops are the family farms, where the confined animal feeding operations have gone more to the mega farms, right, and into the contracts with the Smithfields and the Purdue's and all the big, the giants, which really changes the whole landscape. We support strongly family farms. We really want them. It's heartbreaking to hear. I went to a hearing in Salina where they were adding, Dannon Yogurt was adding 4,500 cows there, dairy cows. And the farmers were saying, we have plenty of capacity. Spread it out more. Don't put them in one spot. Don't put us out of business. Help us. And they were totally ignored. It's 4,500. It's huge, and so more and more family farms and livestock have gone out of business because of the big ag trumping and underpricing and undercutting and all the things that people may or may not have read about. But I just want to say, how do you go from pasturing and having animals spread all over this country? And there's two issues with that. One is, they'll say the numbers aren't that much different from 30 years ago than they are now. Maybe, in some, it depends, and there's a whole other subject with the ag census that's not good, but skipping that, just saying, okay, we'll accept that for now. The difference is that a cow today, now produces twice as much as it did then, twice, quicker, better, whatever. So we're having, and the hogs and the turnaround from when they can get to their 55 pounds when they can go to market is much quicker. So we've got more going on the fields. It isn't just the numbers and the count at a moment. It's how much more productive those have become. And then the cows produce twice as much manure when they're producing twice as much milk. So a cow today isn't a cow 30 years ago in more ways than one. So if you even count and say, the numbers are okay, they're not when you consider the manure that they produce and what's in that manure that is, a problem for water.
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, it's very interesting because I talk to, hunters about wildlife conservation. I talk to fishermen about, fish conservation and land conservation. All these different organizations work together, but people don't often equate the agricultural system with conservation. And it's so tied together, especially in this region, the Midwest, where we're at is, like you said, the ditches are everywhere. I've looked at maps in the past of, the small creeks and tributaries and little rivers that run around here, and they essentially turn into ditches at some point the further north they run away from the river. And it's so interconnected. So I know you talked in quite a bit of detail, and we can move on to a different topic here in a second. What are some resolutions that we can work towards? I know it's hard because farming and talking about phosphorus and KFOs isn't pretty. Like it's not a glamorous thing to talk about, like talking about a wild sheep. They're beautiful, majestic creatures, and they're easy to get behind. What solutions are we looking for down the road to make sure that, because we all need clean water. Like that's the foundation of life. It's absolutely necessary. So, what do we do?
Well, I think the farmers, the row croppers, are doing it because they're putting less phosphorus down. The best management practices are helping. So I think that program is underway and working. I think when you add more animals to a watershed that's already impaired, increasing the amount of manure and whatever is going on the ground, what we could do is say no more additions. We actually probably need to reduce, but let's start there. Don't keep compounding the problem that we already have. That should be easy, but it's not. And so, that's one answer. Treating the waste or finding what to do with the waste is another, as China is doing, others are doing. That's expensive. So probably the very first step we could take is to at least stop the growth of the number of animals coming in. At least we would then not be compounding the problem year after year after year, taken down, adding on, you don't even know where you're at. And then the other thing we need to do is just be honest about the numbers and what's going on in this watershed with manure. It's huge. It's huge. And, the governor doesn't want to talk about it, Department of Ag doesn't want to speak, it's like, and yet they keep attracting more and more. And then the other thing, nuance that is really troubling that I've just stumbled in the last couple of years is the people that are running these KFOs, the contractors, the coopers and whatever, they're buying the land and they're connected to the Smithfields and the Chinese. And having foreign-owned land in our farmland and foreigners in our food chain, Smithfield's an interesting, they're the ones that were bought off by the Chinese. They're the largest hog manufacturer in the United States. They're here in huge numbers, and they have a processing facility in Coldwater. And, but they came here because it's 50% cheaper to raise the hogs here than it is in China. That's weird. Everything's cheaper in China, right?
Yeah.
Well, the grain is cheaper. The corn and the beans are cheaper here to feed the animals. Okay, I'll buy that. But the environmental regulations here are weaker for them than they are there. That is a flag and astounding. No American should be comfortable with that.
Yeah, and it's so crazy. I did not know that is really...
Well, mostly it's hard to believe and it's hard to understand because China, we all know, has a miserable environment.
Mm-hmm.
The air and everything there is horrible. And so when but China is based on small farms. I mean, their whole economy is based, although they have one of the largest hog operation now. It's funny, I can't find out, Reuters wrote about it, and I can't find out what they're doing with their manure because it's huge. And they've got to be treating it or doing, because there's no way in that size facility they could be just putting it on the ground. But it is amazing that China, why would China care if we pollute our waters and ruin them? What would they care? Yeah.
And I've driven by a few of those KFOs. There's one on the way up in Michigan. My family has a small place on a lake, and there's a couple on the way up there. And even just the smell driving by in midsummer is just like nauseating. I don't know how. People that live around that probably get used to it, but it is. a mile or two.
Three brothers that had a KFO in the Maumee watershed that died a couple of years ago, going and cleaning out the lagoons, and the hydrogen sulfide in there killed them. So the fumes from this it's absolutely a problem. Yeah, and it is a huge problem, and there's no easy solution. And the thing that I've come to understand over the years and getting more into hunting and fishing and like trying to eat more sustainably on my end as one human being. I can only do what I can do. That's my role in this game is I do the best I can. And people are so offended by hunting, but they'll go to the store and they'll buy this meat. It's like I shot one deer this year and I got probably 50 or 60 pounds of meat. I'm still eating it. We're going into mid-June. It's great hamburger. And it's great healthy food. Yeah, it is. And I fish. I get my own fish. I spend all my summer fishing and getting fish to eat. And it's like I'm taking myself out of that because I know how terrible it is. And in my mind, if you really love the resource like that, then use the resource, take your food and it's everybody can't do that. I understand that that's not. Well, everybody could if they wanted to. But they don't. There isn't the political or the personal will to do that, as we see. And I think sustainable ag, regenerative ag, all of that those are great programs, great projects. And I don't see us turning back the clock. Excuse me. Sadly, I don't see confined animal feeding operations going away as a lot of people would like them. I'd like to go back to the way it was. But it's cheaper, and money is a driver, and we have to recognize that. And it's heartbreaking to acknowledge that, but that is reality. So what do you do with, why do we allow growing numbers? Why do we allow more hogs to come in, more dairy, more chickens? And then, and they add to the manure while we're paying to reduce it at the same time. And these programs that they have, H2 Ohio and all the other ones, there's no accountability with them. I challenge you to go to them and say, how many pounds of phosphorus is this really reducing in our watershed? Because they tell us we need a 40% reduction. And not just total, we need dissolved phosphorus. That's the driver. So, tell us what that is. Tell us what that number is. So is it better to do cover crops or a two-stage ditch or whatever the BMP is? Which one of those work better? Or better yet, where is the largest phosphorus coming into the Maumee watershed from? And let's put the projects and focus them in just that one area to actually get real reductions instead of, putting it all over the landscape and some of it having marginal to no return. There's studies out now that say that BMPs aren't working. And could you explain what that is, BMP? Best management practice is like a cover crop, a two-stage ditch. They're what H2 Ohio pays for. Actually, they also pay $60 per acre for the manure to be hauled and to be put on fields. And so if it's not a problem, why are they paying $60 an acre for liquid manure, which is cow and pig manure, and poultry manure? That's the other thing that changed when they went to confinement from pasturing. They have to combine it with water to be able to get in the fields because it's too chunky, which is really obnoxious. But it's too much to put on the fields, in the natural state. So it has to put in lagoons and then water and add it to it so they can spray it and put it in the fields.
Yeah, it's not a pretty process, that's for sure. I live in, the middle of nowhere. That's when they spray that stuff, you're just like, oh my gosh, isn't it?
And you can see the brown.
Yeah.
It's brown. It's not white water. It's brown water.
It is. I've driven behind those tankers. Trust me, I've been there. So on a related topic, but a little bit different. So seeking Clean Water Act impaired status. What does that mean when you're talking in relation to Lake Erie? When you say impaired, I know there's different levels of that with like the EPA and stuff. What does that mean? Pretty
much impaired is impaired. Okay, but it's under the Clean Water Act.
Clean Water Act.
And every 2 years, every state has to evaluate their waters and determine if they're okay or they're not okay. And if they're not okay, they're declared impaired, simply put. So once they're impaired, you're supposed to develop a plan, and then you're supposed to figure out a TMDL, total maximum daily load, which is in the courts right now getting settled for this area. And then you're supposed to report every couple of years and figure out if you're succeeding or not, or adjust your plan to get the waters to be okay. That makes perfect sense, but that's not really what happens. So we put it on a list, and it sits on a shelf, and nothing happens with it. And instead of, looking at new sources like manure or, looking at what's going on in the watershed and making sure that it doesn't at least get worse from where it started, we don't do that either. So it's pretty weak. The laws are there. The laws exist.
Life is hard, and we're out here doing larger-than-life things, whether it's pushing ourselves physically in the outdoors or mentally at work or in the podcast studio. Absolute Aid is here to help you focus, recover, and stay calm during your most intense moments. Absolute Aid, created by nature, made with science, for those who seek to do more.
That's the problem that I've seen with a lot of conservation is all the lip service is there, all the laws are there, but there's nobody enforcing them half the time.
Part of that's true, but, that's not true for a wastewater plant. I mean, if you've seen Toledo, you see Cleveland, you see Detroit, you see Sandusky, you see all these major plants having to stop their sewage overflows, their combined sewers, all that. They're putting a lot of money. And the Clean Water Act has forced them in court to do that. Ag was exempted from the Clean Water Act. So, it was supposed to, the way it was, for years it wasn't a problem, but we've changed ag from what it was, which was pasturing in many farmers, to, at least for the animal part of it, the livestock part, we've changed that significantly. So when we look at law, we have to look at USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, NRCS, which is the conservation arm of it, the 590 standards, and then we have to look at the Clean Water Act. And there is no law that really talks about how those come together or not and what they do. Now, a wastewater plant has to have what they call an NPDES permit. It's a discharge permit for a pipe. And then you're only allowed to discharge so much phosphorus out of that pipe, so many chemicals, whatever it is. There's limits, okay, to protect the water. Those have worked really, really well, as they did with industry when the Clean Water Act was passed, because they used to discharge everything into our rivers. And funny, industry just made the adjustments, and the stuff coming out of the pipe now is a lot better. Once in a while, somebody will take advantage of it and obviously be dishonest. But by and large, it's worked a lot. But ag, on the other hand, has had no standards, so they've got they can do whatever they want. Again, the row croppers, I think, have stepped up. I think it's the livestock, it's the manure issue that's really at the front and center. And it's front and center. I'm going to a conference this week, tomorrow, actually, and they're going to talk about poultry manure in Maryland and how bad it is. I just was Missouri and the swine, how bad it is. The dairy in Wisconsin and how bad it is. You cannot confine animals and have that much manure that close to the barn and not have problems with water, period. Fair.
Yeah. As I dive down this rabbit hole further and further with every episode, I talk to somebody new. The issues grow, but they become smaller in a way because you realize how interconnected all this stuff is. Like I said earlier, it's so connected in every facet of everything that's going on. One thing that I was curious about, and it's been a big topic lately in the oceans, but around here it gets touched on occasionally. But is the plastics in Lake Erie a big issue? Is that something that's happening? Like I remember hearing about it occasionally, but not.
Plastics is a big issue, and it needs. I mean, the way we toss things, the way we get rid of stuff, what's in the water that's going down, everything, it's impacted across the board. So we need to address plastics in a big way, and it is a problem. I see a lot of other organizations doing a great job with it. So we support, and we certainly recognize the problem and understand that it is. But the issue with the water, the most immediate issue right now that we think we can, I don't know if we'll ever be able to do much about it, but at least make people aware. There isn't much there is no national manure organization dealing with manure. I'm sad about that. I think it would be wonderful if, a nonprofit environmental group would help to organize all of us to bring manure to the forefront and say, here's the change, just like with plastics and how we've become more and more reliant on them. There was a sea change in how we raised our livestock, and we don't talk about that.
Another really common issue that I've heard more and more about, just being in like the outdoors community in general, is the Asian carp. I don't know how versed you are on that, but I know it's a huge threat because it can cause some major issues with fish populations in the lake. So has there been any progress with that, or keeping them out of Lake Erie?
I think they've done a great job on they don't want to call them Asian carp anymore. They've got a new name for them. It's escaping me right now, but they're, invasive carp. That's invasive carp. But if you study the Maumee River, the interesting part is the river used to have a lot of wetlands and, growth in the bottom and everything. The carp that came from Europe, that came here, that have been here forever, not the new Asian carp group, so to speak, ate the bottom and changed the whole nature of the river. That's why it's muddy, because we didn't keep the weeds, which kept it clean and, pristine. But yeah, I think in terms of there's been a lot of the Great Lakes Initiative, Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, GLRI as it's known. A lot of that money's gone to Asian carp and stopping it in the Illinois River and, putting up barriers and watching what's going on and testing and whatever. I hope that enough resources and money have been put. It appears to me it's doing well. Again, there's a lot of national groups that focus on that and really do a great job, and we support them, sign on letters and do whatever. But I think that's a winner in terms of how it's being addressed. Plastic has got a long ways to go. It's not anywhere near that. But Asian carp, we're getting closer to getting the barrier in. We'll always have to be vigilant. And what's interesting is, in the last couple of days, I'm reading this sea lamprey, because they didn't call it like they were during COVID. We may have a surge of sea lamprey, which is, if people don't know what sea lamprey is, they suck on a fish and draw the blood out of the fish. I mean, it's like a suction tube. Yeah. They're really awful. They're ugly and awful and, really not good to look at. But sea lamprey may be coming. That's another invasive. So, we have to be, they've been here a long time, but we were keeping them kind of at a certain level.
Okay.
But now I'm reading because of COVID, because they weren't doing what they were doing during that period, that rash may come back. But for the invasive carp, the Asian carp, I think we're on our way the right way, hoping, and the resources are going there, and I don't see people holding back from doing what's needed. Illinois even stepped up, and Illinois is mad at us because we rerouted the river into the Mississippi. And by the way, part of that was because of the livestock in the Illinois River and the blood and stuff that was going to Lake Michigan. So let's just toss it down to the Mississippi.
It's got to go somewhere, and there's so many issues going on with Lake Erie, and, it's a huge watershed. What's some interesting facts about Lake Erie? Because I know, like, everybody around here, we see it all the time. It's so normal for me. I see Lake Erie probably once a week, twice a week, And,
well, you're not the normal Toledo person.
Yeah.
When I speak, a lot of times people never go to the lake. So that's kind of a sad part of it.
Yeah.
Lake Erie is the southernmost, shallowest of the Great Lakes. It has 3 basins. So here in the western basin, the reason you see the turbid water and the dirty water is because its average depth is only 24 feet. Like, you get to Maumee Bay and it's only 10 feet. And Maumee Bay turns over every couple days. It's just constantly moving around, which is a good thing because it keeps the oxygen in it. And then you get to the central basin, which is between about Sandusky and Ashtabula over that way. That's about 62 feet, and then it'll be a couple hundred feet in the other end. There's 872 miles of shoreline. We have more fish in Lake Erie than all the other Great Lakes combined. This is a cool, productive, amazing lake. We have the islands, which I think are really awesome and fun.
I'll be out there this weekend.
And the Detroit River supplies over 90% of the water to Lake Erie. The only reason that we don't have a more serious algae problem is because of the flow from the Detroit through the Niagara that, goes, it takes about 2 years for all the water in the lake literally to move through.
Wow.
So it's really an amazing, unlike Superior, which is one of the deepest, and by the way, one of the most warming lakes in the globe, which is really a scary
and it's known for being cold.
It's known for being cold, and yet it's got algae on its shores now, which is really, it hurts.
Yeah.
It hurts.
Yeah, and it's all these issues are super important, and I wish locally more people would be concerned about it, because the only time it pops up is when something bad happens, like the algal blooms, and then everyone on the news is all over it. Algal blooms, and they go away, and we don't hear about it anymore.
Well, and there's the algal bloom forecast, right? Every year, is it going to be big, small, what's it going to be? And it's always bothered me that it's only that. The other media event and research event ought to be, here's where we're at with getting rid of the problem. Here's how much we've reduced it. We never hear that end of it, and that is dead wrong. We're spending how much money to deal with it, and yet we don't have a statistic. I challenge you to get one statistic, one number that says, here's, these programs produce this much reduction, these didn't work, we should tweak them, we need more research or something in this. Why aren't we doing it to get the return on investment to reduce the problem so we get rid of it? I'm tired of the algae forecasts. We should have been at this point, we should have been resolving the problem. We're not. And that's what happened in Chesapeake. And then they did an executive order, and we're trying to get a Lake Erie executive order where the federal agencies, states, and all the other local governments and researchers would all convene every year and look at all the programs and actually manage them, not just piece by piece by piece, and actually get USDA and NRCS at the table and figure all this out and have report on it. So when you're reporting, you're not going to say if it's going to be a big bloom or a small bloom. You're also going to say, well, here's how much progress we have or haven't made every year with getting the problem solved for this amount of money spent. We deserve that.
I would say so, yeah. And I see a lot of problem with the way government operates. Everything is so slow to take in effect. I mean, things move so incredibly slowly. It's bureaucratic.
It depends on how much the public right. I'm watching the gun thing right now. The gut-wrenching stuff that happened in Texas, and the good news is there does seem to be a groundswelling of people saying you must do something. I mean, why we can't raise the age limits beyond me? Why we can't ban them altogether? Assault weapons. From a personal perspective, I don't get. But if we cared enough about Lake Erie, if we had Chesapeake people went to the mat and decided that Chesapeake Bay was important enough, you need to understand that this same issue faced them. And the oyster and the crab industries, businesses, went out of business because of the algae, because of the lack of oxygen in Chesapeake. It is thriving today, and the oysters and the crabs are back. Have they solved the problem totally? No. They're still working. They got about 60% of their 40% reduction, better than anywhere else I can find in the country. But those people cared enough. There's a Chesapeake Bay organization that's really good. They cared enough to mandate and to get the government to do something. If people care enough about Lake Erie, about fishing, about swimming, about drinking the water, about whatever connection you have, about having a property or whatever, we all need to rise up together and have the same voice, ask for accountability. This meeting, this year we could say, hey, instead of having just an algae forecast, I want to know how much money you spent in the last year. I want to know how many pounds of dissolved phosphorus you reduced. I want to know which programs worked. Where is the most coming into the lake? Where do we need to have? That's a business decision. That's what government ought to be doing. Instead of, let's just pay everybody for everything and no accountability. And if the lake gets benefit from, it's about the lake. The money comes because of the lake. But no one's telling what the lake is benefiting from.
So I've found it personally very difficult to get people to care about the lake, the Maumee River locally around here, because they're scared of the dirt-colored water. I know people that will not even go there. They don't want to look at it. They don't want... And that's just... the outdoors, naturey people, they're all fine with it. They're like, yeah, that's cool. I love the river. I love the water. I love Lake Erie. I love to fish in it. But the average person that's not an outdoors, invested in the outdoors, doesn't live on Lake Erie, the hardest thing I've had is to get them into the conversation. Like, how do we make them care? That's the hardest thing for me, is I can't figure it out. It's like the hardest puzzle to crack. Why do we get them to care?
Well, I tried with businesses and they weren't quite committed enough. I'll leave it at that. But what I have found in looking, because I have a finance background, so I have the cost benefit stuff, and how you get the support and all that, matters in terms of building it. I'm finding boaters are the key people that have the greatest, and they have an investment in it. They go out a lot in the lake, even if they don't always use their boats, they care. They are really front and center birders, care about the lake, and personal watercrafters, kayakers and whatever. I think those are the core groups. I think, we talked about this off air before we started, but you kayak the whole Maumee River. If we could get organizations to sponsor something from Fort Wayne to Toledo where we kayaked and people saw, if people knew what I shared before, that the Maumee River is the most productive river in the Great Lakes. It's a very, very fishy river. Over 100 species of fish. I mean, it is amazing what's in that river and what, if we appreciated it and we celebrated it more, then I think you begin to build the support for it. But initially, the boaters do care. The yacht clubs and the marinas and all those people, and certainly the charter boat people and all those care. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we have sport fishing here. We don't have much commercial fishing. And the other reality is walleye's doing really, really well. Yeah. And and that's great. Why? In part because we have all that water coming from the Detroit to the Niagara constantly flushing things out. So when it parks here and it makes the problem where we're in the water with it, where it's showing that there's liver problems and stuff being subjected to algae, just breathing it's not a good thing. It's a little tougher than Chesapeake where it parked and was at, where now they've got the oxygen back and the crab and the oyster are back. I'm glad the walleye are here. I'm not sure if the perch are or are not impacted, the yellow perch, by it. But by and large, that lake is so important to the economy and to the area. And if we don't speak for it, the government is going to yield to big ag and to allow more confined animal feeding operations, more manure to come in until we go to our knees and we have another burning of the Cuyahoga. I don't know what that'll be. I was hoping Toledo and the water crisis was going to be enough to turn the corner. It's not been. Mm-hmm. It's always referenced. It's in every study and everything they do. But, we didn't have deaths that were attributable, at least in that period of time. There's not much evidence that occurred. I hear people getting diarrhea and infections, lung things from this. In fact, I'm working with a reporter now on health effects, but I don't know what it's going to take for the public to do it, but it just seems to me, why do we always manage by crisis, although we need to take advantage of it. But why can't we just say, don't put any more animals here, don't bring more manure here? Why? Cash.
It brings in money. Money is unfortunately the main issue at 99% of the time. And a lot of people, like you and I care deeply about this stuff. And it's so like, why can't we?
Have you looked at rural America, what's happening? I mean, I've gone to the communities where these things are going in, and stores are closing because they employ less people. The numbers of farmers have been substantially, like I said, an 80% reduction of the family farms raising the livestock. People are moving out of the area. They can't afford it. The churches are suffering. The school. Mm-hmm. It's rippling through the whole system. So these things have had a profound effect on rural America in a way that most of us don't understand. Unfortunately, the middle-class people that are in those areas, the farmers, don't have the political capital, to sway and I've got right now, I should let you share that there's a facility, 7,350 hogs. I call it the worst KFO I've ever seen permit application. 2 wetlands. It's got a wooded area. It's within a mile of the St. Joe's River. It has gravel in the soils where the lagoons are going, which is really awful. It's around people that have just built homes recently. It's within a couple miles of a lake, inland lakes that people swim in. And they bought the doggone thing 2 years ago from a couple supposedly getting a divorce, where they outbid it, supposedly, between the family, the people, the neighbors, and the giant Cooper. And so they bought it to put it there 2 years ago, and then put in a permit application. If that permit can't be denied when it's got wetlands and wooded area in a river, gravel in the soil, I mean, what other criteria could you?
Yeah.
I don't know what else why something shouldn't be, but yet the permit application's there, and the person who's going to manage it, who's on the application, Bill Kanapke, is a major figure with the Ohio Farm Bureau, and it's frustrating because it hurts the neighbors, it hurts the community, it hurts the water, it hurts all things. Why?
Yeah. For a few more livestock. I think the problem is it's not people like me and the farmers that live around me. It's the people with the big money. They just get to do whatever they want most of the time, is what it seems like, because they can be like, hey, Congressman, you want some of this cash flow?
If you understand how a confined animal feeding operation really works, the nuts and bolts of it. I mean, I don't have one, but the farmers who tell me, they have contracts. So the animals are contracted for, the food is contracted for, the facilities are contracted for. Everything is done to make sure the animals are safe to eat and go to processing. The only thing the farmer that owns the property gets to manage.
It's the crap.
So if we require, it is. Well, so think about it. So if the only thing he really has discretion over, okay, he gets some money from the other stuff, but he's at their mercy, right, for whatever. So the only discretion he has is on manure. So if we require manure to be treated, or we require it to go further, be spread out in a larger area, or whatever it is to manage it, he loses. He's probably going to lose his shirt. What a brilliant approach by Big Ag, because you're caught between the rock and the hard place.
Yeah.
And yet, if we don't manage the manure, the water is going to continue to get worse.
Very disheartening to think about.
If you only knew.
Yeah, well, you would be the one to feel that, deep in your soul, because I mean, this is your life. You fight for this river, which I'm very appreciative, or this lake, very appreciative of. What is on a positive note? What is some of your favorite places along Lake Erie? I mean, obviously you live there, so you have to love your home. But I mean, I've been around. I haven't been to a lot of places along the shoreline. I mean, I've been up to Cleveland. I've been to the islands. I've been to Maumee Bay State Park. All these areas, and I've fished out there. I've never been over the Canada side or anything.
Canada's so undeveloped, and if you go over to Presque Isle, it's beautiful. I also do the Toledo Lighthouse. The lighthouses along the lake are fun and interesting, with a lot of history, a lot of stories. Certainly the New York in Pennsylvania, over there's another Presque Isle at Erie, Pennsylvania. The beaches along Cleveland are really cool, and the Cuyahoga River is rebounded. There's a blazing paddle event there at the end of July that we're connected with, and the lake and people swim it. I just like to go around it and walk it, pick a good restaurant on it, enjoy it. But yeah, it's water. It's beautiful, and so there's it's 872 miles of shoreline. That's a lot so you can just go traveling around the lake for a trip. It's not going to give you the same experience as you're going around Lake Michigan, where you go to Saugatuck and more commercially stuff. But if you like, especially on the Canadian side, it's not real accessible in a lot of places because it's pretty much farmland if you go there along the land. And in Canada, they commercially fish the walleye and the perch with managed numbers and stuff. But the AO areas of concern are getting cleaned up. The Black and the Ashtabula and the Cuyahoga. Maumee's a bit stranger in terms of just how it is. Detroit's really, Bob Burns is the keeper up there. They're doing amazing stuff up there. And there's the Belle Isle up in Detroit. We've been up the Apostle Islands in Superior. We do water wherever we go.
Yeah.
So Lake Erie, but if I had to pick a spot, yeah. We live next to Maumee Bay State Park, and we have, how many people watch this? And we have nesting birds, amazing nesting birds right now. Mm-hmm. And we have a green-throated hummingbird that comes around all the time. And there's a pair of orioles that are now. I mean, it's just, the warblers come through, and nature here is prime, and it's just the herons and the egrets that sit on the shore, the fox that go on the ice in the winter and mate and come in with their cubs. I mean, yeah. I mean, the ducks, the different kinds of ducks that come in the spring and leave in the fall. This is an amazing place that most people don't even realize. So I would actually say Maumee Bay is a great place to see it all.
Yeah, actually, I just had Kim from the Black Swamp Bird Observatory on here not too long ago, and I went out to the biggest week, and I love doing nature photography and wildlife photography, so I was out there. And yeah, people don't realize how crazy it gets around that time of the year. I've been trying to get my listeners to realize that, like, it is the place to be. You can't walk on the boardwalk half the time. It gets so wild.
And see, we're so blessed because we built our home right next to we abut Maumee Bay State Park. Oh, wow. So I'm sitting on my bed one evening, looking out, getting dressed to go out, and there's a pair of Baltimore Orioles, a pair of cardinals, some warblers. I mean, it was like a window on wildlife. I mean, this morning I was looking out at a heron, just sitting there waiting to grab some fish, and the seagulls out there. Obviously, the fish were there. Living on the water is a new experience every day, and looking out there is new. And the number of birds and wildlife here is astounding. And people, we're the old black swamp, but that means we're also a very productive nature area that is just amazing. The deer, and we have beaver in the ditch. We've had otter. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just, and people will come and they'll walk near where we're at, and they'll like, oh my gosh, and I'm like, I just feel blessed. And part of the reason I give back is because I feel so blessed that we're able to live in such an amazing place.
I'll tell you, the best moment I've ever had on Lake Erie is I used to have this local television show. It was a nature show. We'd go around and we'd look at cool places on the Buckeye cable. And so me and the camera guy will go out there and are out on Kelly's Island, and we're looking at all the normal stuff. You got the geological rock scrapes, mm-hmm. or I forget what they're called, and then there's the state park campground, and there's beautiful lakeshore out there. There's the old dilapidated factory or whatever that was out there on Kelly's Island. Just hike all the way to the far end, and you come out and it's just like a rock outcropping looking over the sunset. And the sky, I have a picture of me out there. The sky turned purple. And I was like, why would you ever drive hours east or west to go to the ocean when you could just come here? It's like an hour from Toledo, essentially. And I just remember thinking, how have I never done this before? And now I just absolutely love Lake Erie. It is just amazing. It's just as picturesque as the ocean. They have great seafood. I mean, come on, what more can you ask for? The islands, they have the kayak rendezvous this week, and I'm going out there with some friends. I just am absolutely in love with it. I hardly need to go anywhere anymore to enjoy the water. And I just wish more people would realize that locally, because it is so amazing. If you can get past the preconceptions, it's an astounding place to be.
We need more events in the Maumee. I mean, we need to celebrate the Maumee more so people come here. Even fishing tournaments with kids, the biggest fish, the smallest. The Blade used to sponsor them, and obviously the Blade's not in a position probably to do that anymore. But bringing people to the river and understanding the river and celebrating this amazing resource would at least help the resource, I think, in the long run. And
that's one more thing that I just was blown away when I kayaked the river. Some of those western reaches of the river mm-hmm. are just, you would never think you're in Northwest Ohio. You would just, there's no way. On the Indiana border all the way up basically till you start getting into the Napoleon and things of that nature. It's just a beautiful river. And even through the rest of that, I mean, the whole river is beautiful. It's so
pretty pristine in most of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really not developed all that much.
Yeah.
And it's the amazing, there's a resort area down there. What is it on the other side of, is it Napoleon? Which, I don't remember which, because we usually go down when the ice melts, okay. When the ice things come. But there's a whole area there where they camp and they go in the summer, and people don't realize. I'm talking. Yeah, the Maumee is a tourist area. I had somebody this last weekend. We had a garage sale, and somebody came in and bought a property down the street from us, and they live in Toledo, and they bought it just to go there on the weekends so they could go through the park and enjoy going in the park because they love it so much. And we look at that house and there's cars around it all the time. So I don't think of it like that here, but we have a resort area in many ways. This used to be, I've done a documentary that's never been done with a lady who talked about at the turn of the century, they were renting cottages at the mouth of where the river and the bay meet, and the European opera played there. And, how beautiful it was, and how people came from all over the world and rented cottages there for $85 a week. Now, this is in the late 1800s, early 1900s. That was big money.
Yeah.
So, and it's and it's coming back. I mean, you can feel it if we can conquer this algae thing where we don't get killed with the bad publicity and plus just the health issues and the inability to use it. There's so much opportunity here to do so much. And anyway.
Yeah, and we'll end on one last question. You have an interesting background in getting involved with this. You came from finance, and I believe you worked for the city of Oregon or something along those lines. And a lot of people, especially like me growing up, I've always wanted to do something in the outdoors. It's just been a passion. I've always loved the outdoors. But something that struck me down that path was you don't just have to be an ecologist, or you don't have to, I say that all the time, you don't have to be an ecologist. You don't have to be a biologist. You're a prime example. You're doing a ton of amazing things to help this beautiful water that we have around here. So what advice do you have for maybe people who want to work in conservation, protect the outdoors, no matter if it's woodlands or water or rivers or mountains or sheep or goats or whatever it is? What advice do you have for an up-and-coming outdoors lover to get involved in working like you do in this?
To be honest with you, it's tough here.
Mm-hmm.
And this area is not exactly an environmentally, progressive area to be in. It's tough to be that. I joined Waterkeeper because exactly what you said. I have a finance background, and I don't know biology and chemistry well at all. And by being able to connect to an international organization with keepers, one keeper in each thing, I could reach out and ask them about the chemistry, biology, nonprofit stuff and everything to connect. You kind of have to find your own spot. I mean, Black Swamp is a wonderful organization for the birding organization, and so they always need volunteers. A lot of these organizations need volunteers and help. But if we don't collectively protect the resource that all of this is dependent on, then we're missing the heart of it. If we can't get the heart to beat, the rest of it's going to go by the wayside. So care enough about the lake, but be it Waterkeeper or something else. But I call myself a weird environmentalist. And secondly, as you can tell, I just love the lake and I just want to help it. I don't want to hurt ag. I don't want any. In fact, I want economically to help everyone to make it work. But first of all, we have to be honest about what's wrong, and there aren't many people to do that. And so, I find myself in a quite unique position to speak out on this in ways that others are not willing to. And so, do your thing. Go to a city. If everybody just cared that water was a great resource. And every time you talk to your neighbor and your family and your politician and your church and you have everybody's webbed into different Rotary Club and all these different organizations. Make water a priority. Make it the mainstay of what we are about. Make sure that you get speeches and get educated and understand it better. If everybody could just do a little of that in whatever elements they choose to be in, the more we make water rise to the top of the political puzzle, because right now, if you take a poll, water isn't there. Mm-hmm. Neither is environment, but water ought to be there. I mean, it just ought to be. So until we elevate it to compete with big ag and big money, we're going to struggle, and we're going to risk so much that we love.
I would agree with that, and I'm on your team. I appreciate what you're doing, and I think it's really important, and I think, I have all I have is my audience, and I want them to be aware of these issues because I do love Lake Erie and all this water around here. And importantly, I want to thank you for your time for coming in today and talking with me. I've had a great time. If you want to, you can let people know where they can learn more about the Lake Erie Waterkeeper website.
Just go to our website, lakeeriewaterkeeper.org website.
And I'll
you see, and there's links on there if you want to email me or have a question or whatever. We have monthly meetings usually. We've been moving them lately. They're usually the second Thursday. The next one will be June 16th, I think is Thursday anyway, at Paco's. It's open to everybody to come in. And we just wrap. Sometimes we'll have a speaker, sometimes we won't. We have the Lake Erie situation, or the Erie situation, coming up this Sunday. That'll be shown, a good documentary. But we meet. We have monthly meetings the second Thursdays of every month at 7 p.m. We get a newsletter out, and we advocate, and we table sometimes, and we just try to educate. It's a challenge. It's a challenge to have it grow, but yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I don't want to keep you all day, and I appreciate you coming in.
Okay, thank you.